Okay, chapter 13. I might have to do this in 2 goes because it's quite a long chapter. So the section is section 5, Nap, chapter 13. Still waiting, Offred slips away from the present into the private spaces of her own body, into memory and into dream and a nightmare. She recalls her failed attempt to escape. So again, we know that we're going into a flashback again. The question in York Notes is, consider the various functions of memory in relation to the representation of Offred's character and the structure of her narrative. So we're going to be talking about the structure of her narrative as well. So this is going to be quite a hefty chapter. So I may split it into 3, first half, second half, and then talking about structure. So here is the information from York Notes. Offred describes the boredom of her situation, likening herself to a prize pig. So again, animal imagery from spilling over from the last chapter as well. She remembers one compulsory rest period at the Rachel and Leah Centre when her friend Moira was brought in by the aunts, and relishes the memory of Moira's spirited resistance against the brainwashing sessions in which Janine proved herself the most abject female victim. Offred also thinks about male and female bodies, though not in the way prescribed by Gilead. Instead, she meditates intensely on her own bodily sensations. Sinking from meditation into sleep, Offred has 2 of her reoccurring nightmares. First, her dread that Luke is dead, and then her replay of their failed escape attempt across the border to Canada. There were gunshots. Luke disappears, and Offred remembers her physical and emotional anguish as her child was dragged away from her in the snow. In this state of anxiety, Offred is awakened by a bell and has to leave her room to join the commander's household downstairs. This chapter has a very complex construction, characterised by the time shifts between present and past, and between waking and dream. The one thing Offred has in her imprisoned condition is a lot of free time, and in this waiting time she escapes her role as passive breeding animal by thinking and remembering. When Offred is thinking about her own body, it is as though she is exploring her inner space like a dark continent within her. This passage is an excellent example of écriture féminine. So that's spelled E-C-R-I-T-U-R-E. I've got ants everywhere. Feminine. Where writing about her body provides the site of Offred's resistance to Gilead's ideology. There's a glossary here. Les Sylphides, Sylphides, is a popular romantic ballet with music by Frédéric Chopin. First performed in Paris in 1909 by Diavelli's Ballet Russe. Now, a name that we've heard of before for your critics' quotes. For a detailed discussion of écriture féminine, see Helen Sixus's essay, The Laugh of the Medusa. We've talked about her before, and I think we've talked about her in relation to the feminine Gospels as well. The Laugh of the Medusa in New French Feminisms, 1981. Helen Sixus, and that's Cixous, and Helen is spelled Helene, and it's an essay. I'll try and find it now whilst I'm thinking about it. Okay, I've just added that to our chat. It's called The Laugh of the Medusa Theory. Have a read of that, because it explains this écriture féminine, and I'll just give you some info on that. So what is it? Écriture féminine thus exists as an antithesis of masculine writing, or as a means of escape for women. In the words of Rosemary Tong, I know a Rosemary Tong. Six has challenged women to write themselves out of the world men constructed for women. She urged women to put themselves, the unthinkable, unthought, into words. So trying to think yourself out of the world that men created is a very basic understanding. So have a read of it and see if you could add that into your revision notes, because that'd be a really good one to put in, and also relevant to feminine gospels as well, and Streetcar, obviously. And the way that it's relevant to Streetcar as well, of course, is whilst Offred, well, you'll see what she's going to do in a minute, tries to think her way out of the Gileadian world that she's living in, you could compare that to how Blanche does the same with her baths. She escapes into the bathroom, into her bath, to escape the world. And actually, of course, that links therefore to chapter 12 when Offred's in her bath and it's the only time when she's got that privacy and she's protected. Blanche can lock the door, so she's also got that. And there's also people waiting for her outside. So it's temporary, just like Offred's security in the bath is temporary. Okay, let's do it. Chapter 13, nap. There's time to spare. Ooh. This is one of the things I wasn't prepared for the amount of unfilled time, the long parenthesis of nothing. So it implies that she had time to prepare for the other aspects of her job, which shows how regimes do not match expectations. She's literally, there are big swathes of time where she doesn't have anything to do, which is, we in the 21st century rush around. We're always doing something, working, we've got this to do, we've got kids to sort out, we've got dogs to walk or whatever. We don't have huge swathes of time to do nothing. So that's another way in which her life is so different now. Time as white sound, nice metaphor, which means nothing, no sound. If only I could embroider, weave, knit, something to do with my hands, which shows envy of the wives who are expected to knit for the front lines, as mentioned previously, when they're making scarves with penguins on. I think it was mentioned before. And all of these activities, weaving, knitting, sewing, embroidery, are all inherently female tasks, female pastimes that we've seen in probably all of Jane Austen's novels. So they take women back to times when they had nothing else to do because they didn't work. Particularly the higher class women, they might have had nannies look after their kids. They were trying to fill their time to stop the boredom, really. I want a cigarette. I remember walking in art galleries through the 19th century, the obsession they had with harems. I'll just go back to the I want a cigarette. A small thing that she took for granted are now beyond her reach due to her position. Cigarette also links to anxiety, something to do with her hands, and when you're nervous and you smoke, I guess it's something that you can do to take away the anxiety, or you think it takes away the anxiety. I remember walking through art galleries through the 19th century, the obsession they had with harems. Harems were sexual groups, lots of women, one man. Dozens of paintings of harems, fat women lolling on divans, turbans on their heads, or velvet caps being fanned with peacock tails. A eunuch in the background. A eunuch, the note on here doesn't make sense. Man who has been defiled so he's no longer fertile, guarding a sexualized woman. He protects them. So a eunuch is a castrated man, okay, placed in charge of a harem or employed as a chamberlain in a palace. So he is guarding a group of women because he is not seen as a threat, because he doesn't have a penis or testicles anymore. Studies of sedentary flesh painted by men who'd never been there. So the irony is that the men that painted these harems had never been in a harem. So the point that she's making is that the objectification of women were viewed from the perspective of and for men, which links to wider Gilead. It's created by men for men without thinking about the effects on women or caring, or even caring what women were going through. So even Offred's narration is put together for men. That's an important point. When her tapes are put together, they are done so by a man. Her entire story is comprised of masculine framing, not feminine as it should be. So that's really, really good. Her entire story is comprised of masculine framing. These pictures were supposed to be erotic, and I thought they were at the time, but I see now what they were really about. They were paintings about suspended animation, about waiting, about objects not in use. They were paintings about boredom. But maybe boredom is erotic when women do it, for men. So the narrator is in a state of suspended animation. She's waiting to be called upon to have sex with the commander, just like the women in the paintings. If they were about objects not in use, she too is an object. And not only is she not being used, she's being kept from using the very parts of herself that made her a person rather than an object. All about the objectification of women. I wait, washed, brushed, fed like a prized pig. Nice simile. Zoomorphism, zoomorphism. Animalistic imagery strips Offred of her humanity and consciousness. A prize pig was also for use. A prize is awarded to the fattest pig, who will ultimately be eaten away. She's being fattened up for a specific use, just like the pigs. Sometime in the 80s, they invented pig balls for pigs who were being fattened in pens. Pig balls were large coloured balls. The pigs rolled them around with their snouts. The pig marketers said this improved their muscle tone. The pigs were curious. They liked to have something to think about. Which is quite sad, really. They're bored out of their minds because they've got nothing to do, cooped up in a pen. And her pen, she's being cooped up in her room, which is like a pen. She's curious and likes to think about things to fill the time as well, because of course she's got a brain. Animals, we know, like to use their brains. I mean, look at the breeds of dogs that we've got that, they have to, retrievers have to retrieve, otherwise they get really sad. Collies have to herd. German Shepherds have to guard. And we use lots and lots of things to keep their brains active. But she sat here not being able to do anything, but she likes to have things to think about. I read about that in an introduction to psychology, which is a flashback to a time, flashback to a time when she was studying psychology, where women could read about psychology, where women did have power. They were capable of things like going to university to learn about subjects that defy femininity, for example, psychology, instead of food technology. And that links quite well to the unseen text we were reading the other day, doesn't it? About the girl that wasn't allowed to go into science class. That and the chapter on caged rats who'd give themselves electric shocks for something to do. So, Rebecca, you'll know what I'm talking about here. There are some rats who got so bored that they would give themselves electric shocks just to break up the boredom. And then one of the pigeons trained to peck a button that made a grain of corn appear. Three groups of them. The first one got 1 grain per peck, the second 1 grain every other peck, the third was random. When the man in charge cut off the grain, the first group gave up quite soon. The second group a little later. The third group never gave up. They'd pecked themselves to death rather than quit. Who knew what worked? And that's all about variable reinforcement. She then goes on to say, I wish I had a pig ball. She wishes she had something to do, something to think about. Dehumanising herself. Now the comment on Genius is dehumanising herself, showing her lack of self-worth. Yeah, it could be that. I think what she actually means is she's bored out of her mind and she just wants something to do. Just to push a ball around would be more interesting than sitting and waiting. In the afternoons, in the afternoons, we lay on our beds for an hour in the gymnasium between 3 and 4. So we're back at the Rachel and Leah Centre. We've gone from present to past without any indication structurally. So they lay on their beds for an hour in the gymnasium, just like children, infantilizing. It's like nap time where adults in Gilead try to keep the toddlers, the handmaids, calm, a way of control to prevent any rebellion. They said it was a period of rest and meditation. I thought then they did it because they wanted some time off themselves from teaching us. And I know the aunts, not on duty, went off to the teacher's room for a cup of coffee or whatever they called, whatever they called by that name. Oh, so it could have been anything. But now I think the rest was also practice. They were giving us a chance to get used to blank time. Going back to whatever they called by that name, there may not have been tea or coffee for them to have because war produces product scarcity. There might not have been any coffee or tea. It's a callback to the constant enemy of the book, the faraway wars of Gilead, which we never really see anything of. We don't know if they really exist or they're just a way to keep people grateful for for Gilead looking after them. So is the coffee really coffee or a substitute to appease the masses? Who knows? So she thinks the rest was actually practice, giving us a chance to get used to blank time. A catnap, Aunt Lydia called it in her coy way. Again, another example of animal imagery. So now they're cats. The strange thing is we needed the rest. Many of us went to sleep. We were tired there a lot of the time. We were on some kind of pill or drug, I think. They put it in the food to keep us calm. This is an example of regime control. You either obey or you'll be forced to obey. This also shows some understanding to rebellion from the handmaids that they will be compensated for. It shows Gilead knows the change is a lot for the women, so they give them drugs to help keep them calm. But maybe not. Maybe it was the place itself. After the first shock, after you'd come to terms, it was better to be lethargic. So what that means is it was easier to live in a passive, tired way than to rebel against them. It shows how the regime is succeeding without the women rising up. It's more manipulation. You could tell yourself you were saving up your strength. I must have been there 3 weeks when Moira came. She was brought into the gymnasium by 2 of the aunts in the usual way, whilst we were having our nap. She still had her other clothes on, jeans and a blue sweatshirt. Her hair was short. She defied fashion as usual, so I recognised her at once. She saw me too, but she turned away. She already knew what was safe. There was a bruise on her left cheek, turning purple. The aunts took her to the vacant bed, where the red dress was already laid out. She undressed, began to dress again, in silence. The aunt standing at the end of the bed, the rest of us watching from inside our slitted eyes. As she bent over, I could see the knobs on her spine. So she had been held somewhere maybe, or she hadn't been able to get hold of any food, or she'd been starved into submission. I couldn't talk to her for several days. We looked only, small glances like sips. Friendships were suspicious. So they were made to feel like they couldn't be friends of anybody, instilling the idea of separation in order to keep people alone, not allowed to have relationships, because if relationships were formed, there was a bigger chance of rebellion. And so they didn't encourage, in fact, they actively discouraged relationships and friendships. We knew it. We avoided each other during the mealtime lineups, in the cafeteria and in the halls between classes. But on the fourth day, she was beside me during the walk, 2 by 2 around the football field. We weren't given the white wings until we graduated. Makes it seem like an academic achievement. They had to pass a criteria to succeed. And for some women, succeeding and wanting to do your best is instilled in them. It's part of what makes them content and happy. So for some women, they wanted to succeed because it was fed to them as an achievement. Another form of propaganda. We had only the veils so we could talk, as long as we did it quietly and didn't turn to look at one another. The aunts walked at the head of the line and at the end, so the only danger was from the others. Some were believers and might report us, so some of the handmaids did believe. Some women did believe in Gilead. They didn't all feel like Offred and Moira did. It's a loony bin, Moira said. I'm so glad to see you, I said. Where can we talk? Said Moira. Washroom, I said. Watch the clock. End stall, 2:30. That was all we said. It makes me feel safer that Moira is here. We can go to the washroom if we put our hands up. Though there's a limit to how many times a day. They mark it down on a chart. I watch the clock, electric and round. At the front over there, at the front over the green blackboard, 2:30 comes during testifying. Aunt Helena is here, as well as Aunt Lydia, because testifying is special. Aunt Helena is fat. She once headed a Weight Watchers franchise operation in Iowa. She's good at testifying. It's a little bit of comedy there. The link to shame in weight is a link to sexual shame. You go to Weight Watchers or whatever the equivalent is, and you admit to what you've eaten. Perhaps you weigh in and you get told off for putting on too much weight or praised for losing weight, which shows a transferable skill. It's Janine telling about how she was gang raped at 14 and had an abortion. She told the same story last week. She seemed almost proud of it while she was telling. It may not even be true. At testifying, it's safer to make things up than to say you have nothing to reveal. But since it's Janine, it's probably more or less true. So we're learning a bit more about the character of Janine here. But whose fault was it? Aunt Lydia said, holding up one plump finger. Her fault, her fault, her fault, we chant in unison. Who led them on? Aunt Helena beams, pleased with us. She did, she did, she did. Why did God allow such a terrible thing to happen? Teach her a lesson, teach her a lesson, teach her a lesson. Last week, Janine burst into tears. Aunt Helena made her kneel at the front of the classroom, hands behind her back, where we could all see her red face and dripping nose, her hair dull blonde, her eyelashes so light they seemed not there. The lost eyelashes of someone who's been in a fire. Burned eyes. She looked disgusting. Weak, squirmy, blotchy, pink, like a newborn mouse. Again, more animal imagery. None of us wanted to look like that, ever. For a moment, even though we knew what was being done to her, we despised her. Crybaby, crybaby, crybaby. It's horrible, isn't it? The women's use of victim blaming shows the extent of their indoctrination, except it doesn't really. It doesn't show the extent of their indoctrination. It shows how they're being indoctrinated. Some will be indoctrinated by it, others won't. We meant it, which is the bad part. Now that suggests that they are indoctrinated. She says we meant it. I used to think well of myself. I didn't then. That was last week. This week, Janine doesn't wait for us to jeer at her. It was my fault, she says. It was my own fault. I led them on. I deserved the pain. So Janine wants to do well. She wants to appear to be, following the rules. Very good, Janine, said Aunt Lydia. You are an example. Janine's the sort of person that craves that reassurance. She wants to be liked by her teachers. I have to wait until this is over before I put up my hand. Sometimes if you ask at the wrong moment, they say no. If you really have to go, that can be crucial. So we're back to going to the toilet now. Yesterday, Dolores wet the floor. 2 aunts hauled her away, a hand under each armpit. She wasn't there for the afternoon walk, but at night she was back in her usual bed. All night we could hear her moaning on and off and on. What did they do to her? We whispered from bed to bed. I don't know. Not knowing makes it worse. And that's a propaganda technique, manipulation technique. Withholding information on what they did to her makes it even more scary. So avoid it. I raise my hand. Aunt Lydia nods. I stand up and walk out into the hall as inconspicuously as possible. Outside the washroom, Aunt Lydia is standing guard. She nods, signalling that I can go in. This washroom used to be for boys. The mirrors have been replaced here too by oblongs of dull grey metal, but the urinals are still there on the wall, white enamel with yellow stains. They look oddly like babies' coffins. I marvel again at the nakedness of men's lives. The showers right out in the open, the body exposed for inspection and comparison, the public display of privates. What is it for? What purpose of reassurance does it serve? The flashing of a badge. Look, everyone, all is in order. I belong here. Why don't women have to prove to one another that they are women? Some form of unbuttoning, some split crotch routine, just as casual, a dog-like sniffing. The high school is old, the stalls are wooden. Some kind of chipboard. I go into the second one from the end, swing the door to. Of course, there are no longer any locks. In the wood, there's a small hole at the back, next to the wall, about waist height, souvenir of some previous vandalism or legacy of an ancient voyeur. Everyone in the centre knows about this hole in the woodwork, everyone except the aunts. I'm afraid I'm too late, held up by Janine's testifying. Maybe Moira has been here already. Maybe she's had to go back. They don't give you much time. I look carefully down, a slant under the stall wall, and there are 2 red shoes. But how can I tell who it is? I put my mouth to the wooden hole. Moira? I whisper. Is that you? She says. Yes, I say. Relief goes through me. God, do I need a cigarette? Says Moira. Me too, I say. I feel ridiculously happy. I sink down into my body as into a swamp, fenland, where only I know the footing. So we're now back in the present. We've had this flashback, we're now back in the present. Treacherous ground, my own territory. Why is it treacherous? Well, because if she feels that if she thinks too much about herself, then it will bring up emotions and guilt and grief and pain of what she's lost, what she was. I become the earth. I set my ear against for rumours of the future. Each twinge, each murmur of slight pain, ripples of sloughed off matter, swellings and diminishings of tissue, the droolings of the flesh. These are signs. These are things I need to know about. Each month I watch for blood fearfully, for when it comes it means failure. I have failed once again to fulfil the expectations of others, which may have become my own. So it's always the women that are failures. It's never that the men might not be able to produce kids. So the imagery here is very natural imagery. It's earth imagery, swamp, fenland, ground, territory. It's the... Why can't I remember that? The group of words that are linked to earth, nature. You know what I mean when I say that. Semantic field. She's trying to get in tune with her body. I used to think of my body as an instrument of pleasure or a means of transportation or an implement for the accomplishment of my will. I could use it to run, push buttons of one sort or another, make things happen. There were limits, but my body was nevertheless lithe, single, solid, one with me. Now the flesh arranges itself differently. I'm a cloud, congealed around a central object, the shape of a pear, which is hard and more real than I am, and glows red within its translucent wrapping. Amazing imagery that is. She feels herself as a cloud, moving around, not something you can touch, not tangible, herself. Congealed around. So if you think about like congealed food, it's gone all gloopy around this object, which is her body, in the shape of a pear, which is hard and more real than I am. So her body, herself and her body are like two different entities. Herself is a cloud that you can't touch, but her body is no longer hers, and she's sort of moving around it, and it's wrapped up in all the red clothing. Inside is a space, huge as the sky at night and dark and curved like that, though black-red rather than black. Pinpoints of light swell, sparkle, burst and shrivel within it, countless as stars. Every month there is a moon, gigantic, round, heavy, an omen. So the moon is not a positive thing for her, because the moon is linked to menstruation, of course. And every time there is a moon, there is menstruation. It means that she has failed. It transits, pauses, continues on and pauses out of sight, and I see despair coming towards me like famine, to feel that empty again. I listen to my heart, wave upon wave, salty and red, continuing on and on, marking time. So all of this is a massive metaphor for menstruation, ovulation and fertility. I'll just go back to Genius. I've missed. Okay, so all that stuff about her being a cloud and her body being a pear, or the shape of a pear. I'll just read you what it says on Genius. Before, her body was an instrument, an extension of herself. Now herself no longer matters, and her body is only important because of its central object, her womb, which can bear a child. Offred's musings show that she has internalized Gilead's attitude towards women, which treats them not as individuals, but as objects important only for the children that they can bear. Women's wombs are a national resource, so link back to last chapter. The state insists, using language that dehumanizes women and reduces them to, as Offred puts it, a cloud congealed around a central object, which is hard and more real than I am. So national resource is a good quote. That is what Gilead describes handmaids as, or handmaids' wombs specifically. I'm in our first apartment. Okay, so we've now gone into a flashback again without any warning. Our shared pronoun. This is a story about her and Luke. I'm in our first apartment, in our bedroom. Now, the fact that she doesn't say I'm in mine and Luke's first apartment, she uses the pronoun our, suggests that could this story be for Luke? Could she be telling this story for Luke, just in case he ever gets to hear it? I'm in our apartment in the bedroom. I'm standing in front of the cupboard, which has folding doors made of wood. Around me, I know it's empty. All the furniture is gone, the floors are bare, no carpets even. But despite this, the cupboard is full of clothes, which is a reference to her womb. The apartment is empty, but the wardrobe is full of possibility. It's a metaphor, of course. I think they are my clothes, but they don't look like mine. So it's like the baby that is going to grow in that womb is not hers. Also, a link to her current wardrobe. It's a wardrobe full of clothes that she's been given, but they're not her clothes. I've never seen them before. Maybe they're clothes belonging to Luke's wife, whom I've also never seen. Only pictures and a voice on the phone. Late at night when she was calling us before the divorce. But no, they're my clothes, all right. I need a dress. I need something to wear. I pull out dresses, black, blue, purple jackets, skirts. None of them will do. None of them even fits. They're too big or too small. Luke is there behind me. I turn to see him. He won't look at me. He looks down at the floor where the cat is rubbing itself against his legs, mewing and mewing plaintively. It wants food, but how can there be any food with the apartment so empty? Luke, I say. He doesn't answer. Maybe he doesn't hear me. It occurs to me that he might not be alive. So we don't know if it's a dream. Well, it is a dream. It's a nightmare. And then there's a break, and we move on to our next nightmare. Just see. Oh, we're almost done. I'm running with her, holding her hand, pulling, dragging her through the bracken. She's only half awake because of the pill I gave her, so she wouldn't cry or say anything that would give us away. She doesn't know where she is. We don't have her name. We're not told her name. Just she, just the pronoun she. Third person pronoun. The ground is uneven, rocks, dead branches, the smell of damp earth, old leaves. She can't run fast enough by myself. I could run faster. I'm a good runner. Now she's crying. She's frightened. I want to carry her, but she would be too heavy. I have my hiking boots on, and I think when we reach the water, I'll have to kick them off. It'll be too cold. Will she be able to swim that far? What about the current? We weren't expecting this. Quiet, I say to her. Quiet, I say to her angrily. I think about her drowning, and this slows me. The shots come behind us, not loud, not like firecrackers, but sharp and crisp, like a dry branch snapping. It sounds wrong. Nothing ever sounds the way you think it will. And I hear the voice, down. It's a real voice, or a voice inside my head, or my own voice out loud. I pull her to the ground and roll on top of her to cover her, shield her. Quiet, I say again. My face is wet, sweat or tears. I feel calm and floating as if I'm no longer in my body. Close my eyes. Close to my eyes, there's a leaf, red, turned early. So that again pinpoints the time. So it's just before autumn. I can see every bright vein. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. I ease off. I don't want to smother her. Instead, I'll curl myself around her, keeping my hand over her mouth. There's breath and the knocking of my heart like pounding at the door of a house at night where you thought you would be safe. It's all right, I'm here, I say. Whisper, please be quiet. But how can she? She's too young. It's too late. We come apart. My arms are held and the edges go dark and nothing is left but a little window. A very little window, like the wrong end of a telescope, like the window on a Christmas card. An old one. Night and ice outside and within a candle. A shining tree, a family. I can hear the bells even, sleigh bells from the radio, old music, but through this window I can see, small but very clear. I can see her going away from me. Through the trees which are already turning, red and yellow, holding out her arms to me, being carried away. Oh, it's horrible. So this is a really, really, really vivid account, a nightmare, but it's written in the present tense, which makes the reader relive the terror of Offred's attempted escape with Luke and their daughter. So structurally, that's quite important. She writes in the present tense. It's like she's recounting it in the present tense. You've ever heard like police recount events, and then she's off out of the car and she's running down the road. Talking in the present tense is a habit for them, but she is using the present tense because it has an impact on us as the reader. We're living it with her, and in her head she's having this nightmare in the present. Her breathless panic is recreated especially strongly at the end of the second paragraph, from she's too young to carried away, where the 9 lines are one long sentence. Structural analysis here, no full stops. And we know that Atwood likes a long sentence. She'll use commas, colons, semicolons, dashes to really extend her paragraphs. And the reason for that is because it's her journey trying to get away with her daughter is long, never ending. Well, it does end obviously, but it feels so panicked, so it gives this tone and mood of panic and fear and running. There are short phrases and repetitions which add to this sense of panic. It's horrible. I hate reading that bit. The bell awakens me, so we're now back in the present again. And then Cora knocking at my door. I sit up on the rug, wipe my wet face with my sleeve, so she's been crying in her sleep. All the dreams, this is the worst, implying that these horrible dreams are frequent and varying, but that she has the same kind of dreams about the same content. Now this contrasts when she claimed the night as her time, as they're filled with this relentless torture. She's talked about the night as her time, where she can think and she has time to herself, but she is tortured with these nightmares. So although it's her time, it's not always a pleasant time. Now my next video is going to be on the structure of Handmaid's Tale, because we've seen a lot of structural analysis come out of this chapter, and it's important, and I'll try and compare it to Streetcar as well.